In the heart of Upper Manhattan, as the sun dipped low on a warm autumn night in late 1940, a man named Vinny, the Ace Moretti, stepped into the private lounge of a hidden lounge on 135th Street. He carried an old wooden box containing a chess set once owned by his old boss, the Brain. At 42, Moretti was the undisputed king of the city's underworld. He was the mastermind who had turned messy street fights into a smooth, corporate machine that ruled the 5 boroughs. Waiting for him at a small table was Bumpy Johnson. Only 34 years old, Bumpy was the muscle and the mind behind the local queen of the numbers game. He was quickly becoming known as a man who played a deep game, someone who used his head more than his fists to win battles. The invitation had been sent out a week ago. Moretti wanted to face Bumpy in a game of chess. There were strict rules, no talk of money or territory, just 2 men and a board. It was a test of pure brainpower to see who was truly the sharper leader. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the stakes. This wasn't just a game, it was a trial. Moretti was checking to see if Bumpy was a peer or just another soldier. The result of their moves would decide if the local crews would be treated as partners or forced to serve as underlings. The room was packed with 50 silent onlookers. Half were Moretti's high-ranking captains, and the other half were Bumpy's most trusted men. The air felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. No one whispered a word. All eyes were on these 2 giants from different worlds as they prepared to battle with their minds. Moretti took his seat, his fingers moving quickly and confidently as he set up the board. He looked like $1,000,000, wearing a sharp, dark suit hand-stitched by the finest tailors in Europe. His necktie was made of fine silk and cost more than a common laborer made in several weeks. On his finger, a large diamond caught the glow of the overhead lamps. He moved with the total assurance of a man who had never faced a real defeat. He fully expected to dominate this board just as easily as he had conquered the city's streets. At precisely 8:15 p.m., Bumpy walked in. He was joined by his boss, Madam Queen, who gave Moretti a polite nod before finding a seat among the crowd. Bumpy was dressed sharply but without any flash. He wore a plain dark suit and a clean white shirt, skipping the jewelry and the showy accessories. While Moretti oozed wealth and raw power, Bumpy gave off a sense of deep concentration and sharp wit. "Mr. Moretti," Bumpy said as he pulled out his chair, "I appreciate the invite. I've been eager for this match." Moretti offered a small, smug grin. It was the look of a man who was already planning his victory speech. "I've heard stories about your skills, Bumpy. They say you see the whole board and think 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I want to see if you can actually hold your own against someone who was taught by the best in the business." Bumpy didn't take the bait. He simply gestured toward the wooden pieces. "It's your turn, Mr. Moretti. Let's see what happens." The clock hit 8:17 p.m. as the legendary match began. Moretti started with a bold classic move, pushing his king's pawn forward 2 spots. It was a standard hard-hitting start used by players who liked to take charge of the middle of the board right away. It was a move Moretti had used to crush countless rivals over the years. Without a second of doubt, Bumpy answered with a sharp countermove, sliding his own pawn forward to block the path. This strategy was known for being tricky and creating a messy, complicated fight. It was also a move named after the very island in Italy where Moretti's family came from, a detail that every person in the room noticed immediately. The lounge was deathly quiet. The only sound was the light thud of wood hitting wood as the players traded moves. They were playing at a blistering pace, their hands flying over the board. Moretti was on the attack, throwing his knights and bishops into the fray to seize the middle of the board. He looked like a man who had played 10,000 games, moving with the cocky speed of someone who trusted his gut to win every time. Bumpy was the complete opposite. He was steady and cool, placing every piece with a specific goal in mind. He didn't try to fight fire with fire. Instead, he was slowly weaving a web, building a hidden trap that Moretti wouldn't even notice until the jaws snapped shut. For minutes in, it looked like Moretti was winning. His pieces were everywhere, posing threats and forcing Bumpy to move backward just to stay alive. Moretti had a smug grin on his face. sure that his heavy-handed style was crushing the man from Harlem. His crew members were smirking and nodding, thinking the boss was putting on a clinic. Bumpy's friends, however, looked nervous. They whispered to each other, worried their man was finally out of his league. Then, at the halfway mark, Bumpy did something that made the room gasp. He slid his queen way out into the open, leaving her completely unprotected. To any casual observer, it looked like a total disaster, the kind of rookie mistake a nervous beginner makes when the pressure gets too high. Moretti's eyes flashed with excitement. He thought he had caught Bumpy in a huge blunder. He reached for his rook instantly, ready to snatch the queen and end the match then and there. "You messed up, Bumpy," Moretti chuckled, his fingers hovering over his piece. "You don't just give away your queen to a guy like me. It's over." Bumpy didn't blink. He just leaned back, as relaxed as if he were sitting on his own front porch. "Go ahead," Bumpy said softly. "Take her and see where it gets you." Moretti didn't wait. He slammed his rook down, swept Bumpy's queen off the board, and tossed it aside. Moretti's men started grinning and nudging each other, certain the fight was finished. On the other side of the room, Bumpy's crew looked crushed. They couldn't believe their leader had made such a massive rookie mistake. Then, Bumpy reached out and moved his knight. The piece landed with a sharp clack on a square that did three terrifying things at once. First, it put Moretti's king in direct danger, forcing him to drop everything to protect his life. Second, it put a direct target on Moretti's own queen. Third, it opened up a path for Bumpy's bishop to strike the very rook that had just taken his queen. Moretti's smug look vanished. His face went pale, and his hand froze in the air as he stared at the wooden board in total shock. He finally saw the truth. Bumpy hadn't messed up. Bumpy had thrown his queen away on purpose. It was a lure, a piece of bait designed to pull Moretti's defense out of position and trigger a trap that was now snapping shut. The quiet room turned into a buzz of shocked whispers. The people watching realized they weren't just seeing a game, they were watching a master at work. This was the kind of move people talk about for decades. Moretti had no choice but to slide his king over to get out of the way of the knight. But doing that left his queen wide open to be snatched up. Even worse, that rook he was so proud of taking was now stuck in a corner, waiting to be killed by Bumpy's bishop. In just one sequence of moves, Bumpy had flipped the entire world upside down. Moretti had essentially traded away his two most powerful pieces for one of Bumpy's. In terms of raw strength, Bumpy was now miles ahead, a lead that almost no one at this level ever loses. But the loss of pieces wasn't even the worst part. Moretti's king was now sitting alone and unprotected in the middle of the board. Meanwhile, Bumpy's remaining army, his towers, his bishop, his knight, and his foot soldiers, were all lined up like a firing squad, ready to end the game. Moretti scrambled to set up a wall of defense. His hands shook slightly as he shifted his remaining pieces, desperate to shield his exposed king and find some way to strike back. He was looking for any tiny opening to survive the storm Bumpy had unleashed with cold, mechanical accuracy. But the effort was pointless. Bumpy's pieces functioned like the gears of a high-end watch, each turn grinding Moretti's options into dust. Every move Bumpy made didn't just pose one problem. It posed three, forcing Moretti to hide instead of fight. At exactly 8:23 p.m., just 6 minutes after the first pawn was moved, Bumpy slid his rook all the way to the back line. "Check," Bumpy said quietly. Moretti stared at the board for 30 long, agonizing seconds. He searched for a hole, a block, a sacrifice, anything to keep the game going. But the board was a cage. Every single square his king could hop to was covered by Bumpy's men. Any piece he tried to move to block the path was already stuck in a pin. There was no way out. Checkmate. The lounge went dead silent for a heartbeat as the reality sank in. Then, the silence shattered. Bumpy's crew erupted in cheers and clapping. They had just watched their leader take apart the city's most feared man using nothing but his brain. Moretti sat frozen, his jaw dropped slightly, his ego crushed into the floorboards. 6 minutes. That's all it took. The king of the 5 boroughs had been dismantled in less time than it takes to smoke a cigar, and he'd been beaten by a younger man from the neighborhood using a strategy named after Moretti's own bloodline. Bumpy leaned over the table, looking down at Moretti's trapped king. He flashed a small, sharp smile that would be talked about in the streets for the next 30 years. "The Sicilian strategy, Vinny," Bumpy said, his voice smooth as silk. "I guess that makes me more Italian than you." The room exploded. Moretti's guards let out nervous, shaky chuckles, terrified of how their boss would handle the insult. Bumpy's people roared with pure joy, loving the perfection of the sting. It was the ultimate gotcha. Bumpy hadn't just won a board game, he had outthought a man who believed he was the smartest criminal in the country, using a style born from his rival's own backyard. The crack about his heritage hit on so many levels. It was a play on the game's technical name, a jab at who truly understood high-level cunning, and an insult so cleverly wrapped in a joke that it was almost impossible to take offense. For a few heart-pounding seconds, the room held its breath. No one knew if Moretti would explode. Would he see this as a slap in the face in front of 50 witnesses? Would the night end in a spray of gunfire instead of a handshake? Moretti leaned back slowly. He rubbed his eyes with both hands, looking like a man waking up from a confusing dream. When he finally dropped his hands and looked at Bumpy, the shock was gone. In its place was a look of real, honest respect. He wasn't just impressed by the moves on the board, he was impressed by the guts it took to make that joke. Then, Moretti started to laugh. It wasn't a fake or bitter sound, it was a loud, belly-shaking laugh from a man who knew when he'd been beat by a master. "You've got me there, Bumpy," Moretti admitted, still chuckling. "You really do. You just proved you've got more of that old-school Italian cunning than I do. That trick with the queen, making me feel like the king of the world while I was actually walking straight into a cage. That's the kind of sneakiness my people are supposed to be the best at. You pulled it off perfectly, and I walked right into it like a kid." Moretti stood up, his eyes drifting back to the pieces one last time. He seemed to be searching the board for the exact moment the floor had dropped out from under him. When he looked back at Bumpy, the racial lines and ego that usually separated men in the 1940s seemed to vanish for a moment. 6 minutes, Moretti said softly, his voice full of wonder. "I've been at this game for over 2 decades. I was trained by the smartest man I ever knew. I've gone head-to-head with pros, guys who do nothing but play chess in the park all day for a living. And you just picked me apart in 6 minutes like I'd never seen a board before." With a nod of genuine admiration, Moretti reached out across the table and offered his hand. "Bumpy, you've earned my highest regard tonight," Moretti said, his grip firm. "This wasn't just about a board game. You showed me a level of brainpower I almost never see. You see the future, you plan for it, and you understand the human mind well enough to make a man trip over his own ego. That queen move. I was certain you'd slipped up. I felt like a king when I took her, but you were just fattening me up for the slaughter. You used my own confidence against me. To win with the smaller pieces after losing your best one, that's not just skill. That's using psychology as a blade." Bumpy stood up, meeting Moretti's hand with a steady, powerful grasp. The entire room hung on that handshake. Here were 2 icons from 2 different worlds, men who were supposed to be rivals or enemies, finding a rare middle ground through a 6-minute display of pure wit. Then, Bumpy spoke 5 words that would be whispered in back alleys, carved into prison cell walls, and written into history books for the next century. They were words that summed up his entire existence. "I don't play to lose." The lounge stayed quiet as those words echoed. Everyone there knew they had just heard a manifesto. It wasn't just about the chess match, it was about how Bumpy lived. It was his approach to every street corner, every deal, and every threat. He didn't show up to participate, he showed up to dominate through preparation. Moretti stared at Bumpy for a beat, then let out another genuine laugh, the kind you give when you hear a truth that hits you right in the gut. "No," Moretti said, a grin still on his face. "I suppose you don't. And I respect that more than words can say. You didn't come here just hoping to survive the night or to look good. You came here with a plan to crush me, and you did it without breaking a sweat. That's the difference between a boss and a worker in any line of work. You don't play to lose. Usually, I don't either, but tonight you showed me I should have done my homework. Moretti turned his head, addressing the 50 men standing in the shadows so there would be no confusion about what had happened. Listen up, he shouted. Every one of you just watched Bumpy Johnson take me apart in 6 minutes flat using the Sicilian strategy. It was the perfect move, Moretti continued, because he just proved he has a sharper Italian mind for strategy than I do. This wasn't a lucky break or a fluke. This was the result of a better brain and better planning. I want everyone here to get this straight. Bumpy Johnson isn't just a guy who follows orders or cracks heads. He's a mastermind who sees the whole board. He sets traps you won't notice until the teeth are already in your leg. He knows how you think, and he'll use your own mind to ruin you. Moretti went quiet for a second, his eyes boring into his own people. The capos, the politicians in his pocket, and the businessmen who relied on his power. The business in Harlem, Moretti declared firmly. The Queen's business and Bumpy's business, it's off limits. My organization will no longer be leaning on them. They have earned the right to run their own show because they've proven they are just as smart as we are. If you work for me, hear this. Underestimating Bumpy Johnson because of his age or the color of his skin is a fatal error. It will cost you everything you have. Learn to respect a brilliant mind, no matter who it belongs to. I just learned that lesson the hard way, and I expect you to learn it by watching me tonight. Moretti's crew nodded solemnly. They realized the rules of the city had just shifted beneath their feet. The old hierarchy was gone, replaced by a new pact born of respect. On the other side of the room, Bumpy's team was beaming. They knew their leader had won a prize far greater than a wooden board and some carved pieces. He had won the freedom for Harlem to breathe and grow without outside pressure. From her seat, Madam Queen watched with a quiet, knowing smile. She had sent Bumpy to that table knowing exactly what was at stake. She knew that in a world ruled by power, the only thing that could truly change the game was a superior mind. Bumpy had played his part perfectly. By putting his brilliance on display, he forced a man like Moretti to acknowledge him. That win bought the neighborhood a level of independence it had never known, securing a future where they could operate without the Italian mobs constantly breathing down their necks. Word of the 6-minute slaughter traveled through the city's shadows like wildfire. By dawn, every crew in the city, from the docks of the Irish West Side to the Jewish syndicates and the independent black operators, had heard the tale. They heard how Moretti had stood up and publicly named Bumpy his intellectual peer. In the streets of Harlem, the story became a badge of honor. It was solid proof, backed by 50 witnesses, that their own could outthink the most powerful men in the country. It showed that respect wasn't just something you fought for with a gun. It was something you could take with your mind. 5 days after that first match, a messenger arrived with a note for Bumpy. Moretti wants a round 2. This Friday, same spot, same time. He says he's been reading up on that Italian defense you used and wants a second chance. He also mentioned he's ready to talk shop once the board is clear, if you're open to it. Bumpy didn't hesitate to say yes. He knew exactly what this meant. Moretti wasn't just nursing a bruised ego, he wanted to see if he could learn. He wanted to find out if he could adapt to Bumpy's way of thinking. This wasn't just a rematch, it was the start of a real professional bond. On the night of September 27th, they met again at the lounge. This time, the crowd was smaller, only 10 men on each side. Both leaders wanted to cut out the noise and focus on the game itself. This wasn't a show for the public anymore, it was a battle between two men who truly respected one another. This game didn't end in a flash. It stretched on for 45 grueling minutes. Gone was the reckless speed of the first night. Both men moved with extreme caution, weighing every single pawn as if their lives depended on it. Moretti had clearly spent his week buried in strategy books. He had dissected the Italian defense, learned how to counter its trickiest lines, and completely stripped away the arrogance that had cost him so dearly the first time. He played with a cold, focused discipline. However, Bumpy took the win once more. This time, he didn't use a flashy trap or a sudden strike. Instead, he employed a totally different approach, slowly gathering tiny, almost invisible advantages. It was a masterclass in patience. Bumpy squeezed the board inch by inch, never giving Moretti a single opening to create chaos or fight back. Eventually, Moretti's pieces were so cramped and paralyzed that he had no choice but to admit defeat. After the boards were cleared, Moretti looked at Bumpy and spoke words that would set the tone for their future. "Bumpy, it's not just that you're a shark at this game. It's the way your mind works," Moretti said. "You won the first time with a bold, brilliant stunt. That queen move was a work of art. But you won tonight with a slow, grinding pressure that I couldn't stop. That ability to change your style based on what the moment needs. That is the sign of a truly superior intellect. You think like a man who should be at the head of the table, not just a man holding the door for someone else. I have more respect for you than I can put into words." Then, Moretti made an offer that caught everyone in the lounge off guard. "I want us to meet like this regularly. Not as rivals trying to prove who's tougher, but as two men who love a good challenge and can sharpen one another. Once a month. We'll switch off, 1 month in my part of town, 1 month in yours. Just the game and a talk about how we see the business. No deals, no pressure, just two minds going at it. What do you think?" Bumpy shook on it right then and there. He knew that Moretti was handing him something priceless, an open line of communication built on a foundation of mutual respect. It was a bridge between their worlds that ignored the usual power struggles and the deep-seated prejudices of the era. Throughout the end of 1935 and into the first half of 1936, Moretti and Bumpy Johnson kept their word, meeting roughly every 4 weeks for a match. They rotated their scenery. One night they'd be in the back of a smoky Harlem lounge, the next at a quiet pasta joint in the heart of the Italian district, or sometimes at a private apartment in Midtown. These weren't public shows. Only a handful of loyal bodyguards were ever in the room. Men who knew that every move on that board was a signal to the rest of the city that the piece was holding. The matches were never predictable. Bumpy remained the superior player, taking about 7 out of every 10 games, but Moretti's skill grew, and he managed to snatch enough victories to keep the fire of competition alive. Some nights were lightning-fast skirmishes won by a single clever trick, others were grueling marathons that lasted 3 hours, ending only when one man had completely choked the life out of the other's defense. The real magic, however, wasn't in the checkmates, it was in the talk between the turns. Moretti began to use their time together as a sounding board for the headaches of running a criminal empire. He would lay out a problem, a rogue captain causing trouble, a complicated deal that was starting to sour, or the best way to handle a police crackdown without starting a war, and wait for Bumpy's take. Bumpy would listen, stare at the board, and then dissect the real-world problem as if it were just another chess position. He'd point out where the hidden traps were, predict how a rival would react to a certain move, and suggest a way to win without firing a single shot. Moretti started treating these sessions like high-level business meetings. Close associates later noted that Moretti would walk away and actually put Bumpy's advice into action. When those strategies paid off and saved Moretti money or blood, he was vocal about it, giving credit to the sharp mind up in Harlem. It was a transformation that stunned the city. What started as a test to see if Bumpy was a peer evolved into a genuine alliance where the king of the city's syndicates actively sought out Bumpy's counsel. The chess matches became a legend in the underworld. Whenever the word hit the street that Moretti and Bumpy are at the board tonight, it served as a signal that the truce was solid. The peace held because the respect was real. As one observer noted, those matches were the highest form of diplomacy. As long as the two were moving pieces, no one was pulling triggers. It proved that trust could be built despite the deep racial and ethnic walls that usually kept men divided. For the younger generation of soldiers, both Italian and black, watching these giants sit together was a lesson in reality. Brains mattered more than bloodlines, and a man's worth was measured by his mind, not just his muscle. The problem of the Mad Butcher. While the bond between Bumpy and Moretti was growing in late 1935, a dark cloud still hung over the city in the form of Arthur, the Dutchman Schultz. 4 years, Schultz had been a nightmare for Harlem. He was trying to seize the local numbers games through raw, bloody terror. He didn't talk, he didn't deal, and he didn't compromise. He simply killed anyone who stood in his way, turning the neighborhood into a war zone. Moretti had already marked the Dutchman for death. His decision wasn't based on a sudden desire to protect Harlem, it was about the bottom line. Schultz's reckless body count was bringing too much heat from the law. A relentless prosecutor named Thomas E. Dewey was already breathing down the necks of every boss in the city, and Schultz's messy violence was giving Dewey all the public support he needed to tear the syndicates apart. The Dutchman had become a liability that the board of directors could no longer afford to keep around. He was a wild animal in a room full of businessmen, and the time to put him down was fast approaching. Moretti wanted to be certain of the landscape before he pulled the trigger on the Dutchman. He needed to be sure that removing Schultz wouldn't turn the city into a bigger mess. If the Dutchman was erased, would the neighborhood return to a quiet hum, or would dozens of smaller gangs start a civil war over the leftovers? On October 15, 1935, Moretti invited Bumpy to a high-end bistro in Midtown. They shared a meal and moved straight to the chessboard. Bumpy dismantled Moretti in just 22 minutes, using yet another daring queen sacrifice. Even though Moretti had seen the trick before, he still fell for the trap. Once the king was tipped over, Moretti got down to brass tacks. "Bumpy, I need your real take on something. The Dutchman is a cancer. He's bleeding your people dry, he's bringing the feds to my doorstep, and he thinks he's too big for the rules the rest of us play by. I'm going to the board next week to get the green light to take him out. He's a dead man walking." Moretti leaned in, his voice dropping. "But I need to know the aftermath. If I wipe him off the map, can you and the Queen keep the peace? Or am I just trading one loud headache for 100 small ones?" Bumpy appreciated the straight talk. He didn't sugarcoat his answer. If the Dutchman vanishes, the neighborhood will be quiet by the weekend. The local operators only want to go back to work without looking over their shoulders. The Queen has everyone's loyalty because she never ran when things got ugly. People trust her. Bumpy tapped the table for emphasis. "I can manage the security. Most of these guys will fall in line the moment the shadow of Schultz is gone. And more importantly, the people who live there will back us. They've suffered under his thumb for years, they want their own people in charge, not another outsider. Give us the freedom to run our own numbers, let us be independent, and I guarantee you Harlem will be the most peaceful and profitable part of your map." Moretti leaned back, his eyes searching Bumpy's face, weighing whether this was a solid plan or just wishful thinking. "And if I back you on this? If I tell the other bosses that the neighborhood stays under your control once the Dutchman is gone, you're certain there won't be a power struggle? You're telling me you can keep the lid on tight without my guys having to step in and play referee?" "I'm certain," Bumpy replied, his voice steady as a rock. "The Queen and I haven't just been waiting for Schultz to die, we've been planning for it. We know who's with us and who might try to act out. We have a system ready to settle arguments with talk instead of lead. We aren't going to use the Dutchman's tactics because we don't have to. The neighborhood is ready for a change. We take over the second he's gone, and we'll keep it quiet because that's what the people want, and it's what I'm prepared to enforce." Moretti broke into a grin and reached across the table. "That's music to my ears. I'm heading to the big meeting next week to get the contract signed on Schultz. And when I'm there, I'm telling the commission that from here on out, the Harlem numbers game belongs to the Queen and Bumpy Johnson. Period. Total independence. No one from my side will bother you, no one will ask for a cut, and no one will tell you how to run your business." He paused, letting the weight of the offer sink in. "You run your house your way. In return, we just look for ways to help each other out when it makes sense for both sides. We have a deal." Bumpy gripped Moretti's hand with a firm, ironclad squeeze. "You have my word, Vinny. The minute Schultz is out of the picture, the war ends. We won't be the ones bringing the heat or the headlines. We'll stay in our lanes, keep things professional, and make sure the money moves without the mess." They sealed the pact with a handshake that carried more weight than any signed contract. For the next 2 hours, they stayed at the board, but the game was just a backdrop. They mapped out the future of the city, whispering about boundaries, conflict resolution, and the specific ways their two empires would quietly coexist. By the time they cleared the pieces, the fate of New York's underworld had been rewritten. 8 days later, on the night of October 23, 1935, the end came for Arthur, the Dutchman, Schultz. While he was dining at the Palace Chophouse in Newark, a pair of elite hitmen acting on Moretti's orders walked in and opened fire. The man who had terrorized Harlem for years was cut down in a spray of lead. He clung to life for a day, but the damage was done. The commission had finally pruned the Mad Butcher from their garden to protect the business of the whole. The news hit the streets of Harlem like a lightning bolt. By dawn, the atmosphere in the neighborhood had shifted from fear to a strange, electric sense of relief. Schultz's empire didn't just crumble, it vanished. His hired guns went into hiding, and the shadow he had cast over every street corner dissolved instantly. As the dust settled, Bumpy Johnson stayed true to his word. There was no bloody scramble for power and no chaotic civil war. Under the steady hand of Bumpy and the Queen, the independent operators returned to their posts. The numbers games began to run like a well-oiled machine, generating wealth for the community without the headlines or the heat that Schultz had craved. The peace between the Italian families and the Harlem operators held firm, anchored by that monthly chess game between two men who had started as rivals and ended as partners. They continued to meet, trading moves on a wooden board while they quietly managed the most complex criminal landscape in the world. Bumpy had proven that in a world of brutes, the man who thinks 10 moves ahead is the man who survives. He hadn't just won a chess game, he had won a seat at the table. He was no longer just a soldier or an enforcer. He was the strategist who had outplayed the King of New York and, in doing so, had secured the freedom of his people. As the years rolled on, the story of the 1935 match became the stuff of legend. It was a reminder to anyone who dared to step into the neighborhood. In Harlem, the game is played differently. And Bumpy Johnson? He never played to lose. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and subscribe to help us bring you more stories of strategy and power. See you in the next one.